We hope you enjoyed episode 1 of Jones Day's Real Assets Roundup. The response and feedback were great, and if you haven't heard it, please visit the link provided and be sure to subscribe to the series. In this program, Brian Sedlak and his Jones Day panel talk about what's being described as the fourth utility, digital assets infrastructure. Water, gas, electricity, digital infrastructure. Shows just how important that fourth utility will be to industry, finance, transportation, government, and society as a whole. Brian and company will drill down and explain, so keep it here. I'm Dave Dalton. You're listening to Jones Day Talks.
Well, welcome to episode 2 of the Real Assets Roundup, where we focus this time on digital infrastructure assets. I'm Brian Sedlak, co-lead of the Real Estate, Energy Transition, and Infrastructure Practices at Jones Day. Go to episode 1 if you'd like to hear more about the definition of real assets or a little bit more about this podcast. Today, we are on location in Columbus, Ohio, and I am joined by Melissa Vandewater, Liz Yaeger, and Marta Lahuerta Escolano. So welcome. Marta, before we begin, I would like your views, your initial impressions of Columbus. Can you give us, you came directly from Paris, you came off the plane, you've had a chance to see some things. Tell us about what you think about Columbus so far.
Columbus is a lovely city. Unfortunately, I didn't have the time to visit the great spots that I've been told about, but definitely tonight I will have the time to do it.
That's great. And Columbus has some great cultural assets, great museums, a fantastic zoo. If you have a chance, go to the zoo. It's too bad that you're going to go home before the state fair next week, but maybe you can come back and visit at some point. Maybe you guys could each introduce yourself and say a little bit about what your practice is before we begin. So Melissa, why don't we start with you?
Thanks, Brian. It's great to be here. I'm Melissa Vandewater. I'm a partner in the Chicago office of Jones Day. My practice is real estate, but I have big focus in digital infrastructure. It really is an asset class that's been busy with real estate work along with other interdisciplinary aspects. And I'm excited to talk about the digital infrastructure asset class today.
Liz, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey, everybody. Liz Yaeger. I am a resident of the DC office, partner in real estate. For the last 12, 13 years, I've been practicing real estate. And out of those 13 years, probably about the last 5 focusing on digital infrastructure. Currently, my practice is about 95% of representing operators in build-to-suit leases with hyperscalers.
That's great, Liz. Marta, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thank you, Brian. I'm Marta Lahuerta Escolano. I'm a partner based in the Paris office, and I've spent the past 14 years specializing in digital infrastructure transactions on a global scale. So my experiences encompasses a broad range of digital infrastructure assets that include data centers, subsea cables, fiber optic cables, and satellites.
That's great, Marta. So, Melissa, if we just surprised you and asked you this question, are you a real estate lawyer or are you an infrastructure lawyer? Are you both? Do you have a view on that?
Really both. That's such a good question. I would say both. I mean, at its core, data centers are real estate assets. But because of the digital infrastructure world, it really touches everything from the utility improvements to the software. So it's very much sort of an integrated system of infrastructure.
As long as we're on that topic, Melissa, why don't you describe digital infrastructure and what it encompasses?
Sure. Digital infrastructure assets really are the physical assets that provide and support digital communication, networking, data transfer and storage, and really online services. They enable everything from internet access and cloud computing to advanced technologies like AI. The assets as part of digital infrastructure are really crucial for businesses, government, and society as a whole. Then they facilitate economic growth, innovation, and access to essential services. As I heard you say, Brian, in episode 1, they are really now thought of as the fourth utility next to water and electricity, and they've really become a key component of modern society. They include data centers, like we've talked about, which really house and store not only the power and cooling infrastructure and equipment, but also servers and networking equipment that help to store, process, and distribute the vast amount of data. Networking equipment as well, routers, switches, firewalls, and fiber optic networks, underground and subsea cables, communication towers, cell towers that really provide for wireless communication, and even things like the Internet of Things. So devices that really collect and store and data for specific purposes. Think Nest thermostats or smartwatch fitness apps, reminding you to get up and take a break and take some steps around the block, for example, after a busy workday. So really everything that's part of our communications network.
Well, that's great. And I know, Marta, you do a lot with respect to subsea cables, but it seems like data centers are really the things that you see most in the newspaper practically every day. So maybe we can spend a few minutes and just drill down a little bit on data centers. Why don't you explain to folks what they consist of, maybe like who's interested in them, who owns them, who uses them? I know there's not one set rule, but maybe you can speak in some generalities.
Yes, so a data center is basically a large secure building or facility that's filled with racks or servers, storage systems, and networking gear. So these centers, they have powerful cooling systems to keep everything from overheating, backup power supplies in case of outages, and tight security to protect the data and equipment. So basically, the main job of a data center is to store, process, and manage huge amounts of data. They make sure that the websites, applications, cloud services, and even things like, for example, streaming videos or online banking work reliably and quickly. You can also think of a data center as having two main parts, an internal part and external part. The internal part of a data center is made up to two major components, the computer part and the technical infrastructure. And externally, data centers, they're heavily dependent on energy operators for electricity production, and they are also dependent on telecom operators.
And so in terms of the typical data center, what type of entities own them or invest in them? What kind of entities use them? Do you have thoughts on that?
Data centers, they can be owned by a variety of players. Some of the biggest ones are large tech companies such as Amazon, Google, and Microsoft. So they build their own massive data centers.
Is that what's called hyperscalers? Sorry.
Hyperscalers, exactly. Yes,
Yeah.
That's exactly that. So they build their own massive data centers to power their cloud services and platforms. And they are also specialized companies that they're called, colocation providers that build and operate data centers, and then they rent out the space, power, and network connections to other businesses. Telecom companies, sometimes they own data centers too, and increasingly investment funds and infrastructure specialists are buying or building data centers because they see them as a valuable long-term assets. As for who uses the data centers, the customer's base is really broad. Cloud service providers like Amazon and Microsoft are big users, but so are banks, insurance companies, retailers, and manufacturers. Basically, any large business that needs to keep its data safe and in digital services running. Media companies like streaming platforms and social networks rely on data centers to deliver content for millions of users, and also governments and public agencies use them to host sensitive data.
Okay. So Liz, I want to kick it over to you now. In terms of the US, like who are the likely, now you don't have to give names, but like what's the profile of a typical data center owner if it's not a hyperscaler? What does that look like?
And these are data center operators that function to either build large data centers for hyperscalers or have co-location facilities, so a multitude of tenants who are in one facility, and the operator provides the services of interconnecting the infrastructure so that those particular businesses can run out of the cloud, et cetera, to then go use the services of the hyperscalers. Two variations, right? Either the data center provides services to the hyperscaler or provides services to the various businesses that then go to the hyperscalers to use their services, like cloud services.
So I know you've been in this area a long time, but maybe you can describe for our listeners, in essence, what's the big deal? What's driving all of this? Why are folks all of a sudden so interested in it? And why every day when I open up the paper, because I'm one of the last people in the world who actually reads a physical newspaper, why is there an article regarding data centers or digital infrastructure?
The reality is that the COVID years really revolutionized the data consumption. It spurred cloud computing, AI, edge computing, and ultimately resulted in a global digital transformation. So there's really a great output and consumption of data. With that happening, that means that you need more power. More power needs to be generated to fuel all our uses and our output. So really, the big deal is that we have larger energy needs, and those larger energy needs currently cannot be met by the utilities or the grid. So we're looking at alternate sources of power that is reliable, cheaper, and also power that can be harnessed at greater amounts to deal with the AI sort of training models that are required for the output and consumption that we're talking about.
In terms of these assets, are they real estate or are they infrastructure? How is that looked at in the market?
Yeah, I would say it's a combination of both. You have infra funds and real estate funds investing in the same sort of projects. So really the industries are looking at it as just an investment opportunity, both from a traditional real estate perspective and an infrastructure perspective. In addition, you have more than one PE platform and its own infra and RE funds investing in the same investments side by side. Now, in terms of financing the data centers, you have lenders looking at it from a project finance perspective, from a traditional real estate perspective. And those models are in line with who the tenants are and the sorts of revenues that are generated by these data centers. From a project finance perspective, because the tenants in a hyperscale lease are so creditworthy, right? These are some of the most creditworthy entities. You really are financing the revenue generated from those leases. Now, from a commercial real estate perspective, you're looking at the asset itself along with the creditworthiness of the operator or would be the borrower.
So in terms of these sites, it seems like Virginia, Chicago, the Dakotas now folks are interested in. What's the other kind of major location in the U.S. where these sites are typically located? I know I'm missing one here.
Ohio, absolutely. We're sitting here. Pennsylvania, Atlanta. We talked about Northern Virginia, Texas. All those areas are really booming right now. There's a lot of data center development, massive AI projects, data center campuses that are over a gig.
And why do you think there's been a recent sighting of these facilities in places like Ohio and Pennsylvania? Just this week, there was announced by a large fund, there's going to be an $85 million investment in Pennsylvania, part of which they'll contribute and part of which they'll catalyze. But from your perspective, what makes a good data center site? What are the attributes and why are folks looking in the locations that they're looking?
Yeah, a few different things. Because the utilities can't keep up with demand, we're looking at secondary and tertiary markets that have natural resources available to them that can provide the kinds of power that we talked about earlier. So there's that aspect. There's also tax incentives. Any incentives that the local jurisdictions can provide will naturally attract the operators, the hyperscalers to that. The labor market. Is there sufficient labor to construct the data center sites? Those are all things that go into consideration. I talked about natural resources, not just from a water perspective, but from natural gas, coal, nuclear, et cetera. All of that paints a really great picture for the perfect site.
So it's part energy reliability, resiliency, availability. That makes a lot of sense. Marta, in terms of Europe or Africa or the Middle East, any kind of general rule in terms of how they're different than the U.S.?
One of the most significant differences in Europe is Europe's strong emphasis in sustainable, low carbon energy for data centers. France is a great example because they benefit from highly decarbonized electricity grid, mainly due to the nuclear and renewables, which is a decisive advantage for attracting large-scale data centers investments. So European regulators, they are increasingly focused on the integration of data centers into broader climate goals. And on the other hand, with respect to land availability, European markets, they face greater constraints around land availability, especially in densely populated regions. The regulatory environment is also more complex with stricter planning and environmental requirements.
Why don't we focus in terms of, if you look into your crystal balls, kind of what keeps you up at night in terms of what you worry about when representing a data center owner or digital infrastructure investor? Maybe, Melissa, you can say a few words about DeepSeek and whether that has impacted in investment, and maybe talk a little bit about the challenges of development and risks and the like.
Yeah, it's definitely those potential disruptors that keep us up at night and our clients up at night. DeepSeek being one of them. The announcement there earlier in January of this year that this startup in China came up with an AI model that was done at a cost advantage with less power requirements, definitely threw our stock market here in the US for a spin. Initially, our clients were uncertain, certainly, what this effect would be long term. But in the last 6 months, we're still very much busy with AI developments. And really, our clients are viewing this as an opportunity. This particular industry has to be nimble because innovation really created this industry and will continue to cause evolution in this industry. So we need to be nimble in reacting to innovation. We've seen that with DeepSeek, where maybe there's potential AI modeling for training type facilities, but that might change. But still, once trained, the AI inferencing sites will still require data, still driving the need for digital infrastructure, including data centers. Clients still remain optimistic.
What I've seen in my 33rd year as a lawyer, when there tends to be a less expensive or less sophisticated version of something, it really doesn't eliminate demand. Quite frankly, I find that it creates demand because then technology gets involved in more items and people want more. And then that requires an ever increasing sophisticated chip or model. So I think in the end, it will likely affect the landscape, but probably doesn't affect the industry long term. In terms of some of the challenges with respect to these sites, Liz, maybe you can talk from a kind of a lender's perspective and what they're thinking about trying to cover in terms of risk, or what happens at the end of the term of these long-term agreements. Maybe they don't worry about it too much because of the length, but maybe you can give some insight there.
Yeah, absolutely. So the reality is that what we're thinking about the lease paper that these, I'm going to focus on hyperscale leases, right? That they're written on. The hyperscale leases are extraordinarily favorable to the tenant. So we have a lot of termination rights for not just failure to deliver, for termination for convenience provisions, termination for failure to deliver certain service levels. So there's a huge risk, not just there's upfront risk, but also risk throughout the operational life of the data center. Along with that, built into these contracts, into these leases, are very strict transfer restrictions, including for foreclosure. So when the lender steps in, they really have to negotiate very strong NDAs to provide for the lender taking over in the event of a foreclosure, so that the lender's ownership is recognized and respected, and all of that needs to be built in the SNDA. And that happens most of the time after the lease has been executed. So there's contentious sort of negotiations that happen. We've moved the market further along where these terms are more acceptable, but it's still a battle when you're negotiating that SNDA.
And I think that's one of the great things about what you and Melissa and Marta do. You're really experts in this area, and you help clients navigate these risks seamlessly. So I know that your long history in this area has been very helpful. Marta, in terms of Europe, are the risks any different, you think?
Actually, with respect to hyperscalers, they are actually exporting the same model to other regions of the world where they are expanding their activities. So the main risk and issues that Liz just explained, we have seen them on hyperscaler deals in Europe, in Africa, or in Middle East.
I will say, though, that there's a lot of stickiness with these tenants. The minute that you're able to deliver, it becomes, on a practical perspective, very difficult for them to actually vacate, to terminate the lease. So really, the initial delivery is, I think, the highest risk point. Once you've gotten past that, it's far easier to refinance, et cetera. The risk goes down because the tenants don't want to move out.
Melissa and Liz, would you say at this point, kind of the procurement of energy at a particular time on schedule is one of the major issues affecting these developments?
Yes, I think with power availability constraints, that's almost the primary issue facing developments being delivered, particularly according to hyperscaler requirements. I mean, I think hyperscalers expect and really engage with data center operators and developers because of the speed to market, their promises of a particular schedule and delivery on schedule. When it comes to procuring power, the developer doesn't really get that level of certainty from utilities. Utilities just don't promise necessarily to deliver by a milestone date. Or if they do, there's really no potential recourse available to a developer that would equate to the exposure to your hyperscalers under your agreement. So that is definitely a risk factor and driving our clients to really consider how our documents go back to back, and then potential gaps in risk and how to potentially mitigate.
Having in mind these challenges, these land and power challenges, some of our clients, at least in Europe, they may be asking the following key question, that is, would it be more valuable to own real estate or to free up the capital to invest in power infrastructures, in cooling technologies, and next generation AI developments? And that's why in Europe, we expect that there will be some sale and leaseback transactions in data centers.
So I know it's our goal here on the Roundup to really not go much over 20 minutes. I think we're kind of at that mark. So maybe that's a good place to stop, since energy seems to be the long pole in the tent for these projects and is really the thing that's impacting siting and developments. Maybe that's a good thing to say for next time. We're probably all going to London, right? We're packing up the bus and going to London for a presentation in September 16th. So maybe we can get a part of this group back together and have some of our energy lawyers join us and talk about energy, because it seems like energy is data and data is energy. For more information, please visit jonesday.com. And remember to subscribe to Jones Day Talks, the Real Assets Roundup, to get advanced access to each episode of the Real Assets Roundup and special subscriber-only content. So this wraps up episode 2 of the Real Assets Roundup, and we hope to be speaking to you again no later than September.
Hey, thanks, Brian. And we'll actually be coming to you sooner than expected with a breaking news episode covering the One Big Beautiful Bill. So stay on the lookout for that. For complete bios, visit jonesday.com. While you're there, check out our Insights page for more podcasts, publication, videos, and other timely content. Subscribe to Jones Day Talks at Apple Podcasts and wherever else quality podcast content is found. Jones Day Talks is produced by Tom Condolis. I'm Dave Dalton. We'll talk to you next time.
Thank you for listening to Jones Day Talks. Comments heard on Jones Day Talks should not be construed as legal advice regarding any specific facts or circumstances. The opinions expressed on Jones Day Talks are those of lawyers appearing on the program and do not necessarily reflect those of the firm. For more information, please visit jonesday.com.